I was this close. That close. To crying.
There's no crying! There's no crying in baseball!
Hey everybody, this is DM Mike, and this is the next campaign diary for Hoard of the Dragon Queen. We are in Chapter 8, so we're near the end. Well, heck, we're at the end of the entire campaign. And so really, our sessions can end at any moment, anytime. I estimate we have probably about maybe 6 weeks in a row, 6 weeks of game time left, depending on what the characters do. Of course, I could have a total party kill at any moment. We have about 6 weeks left, I kind of guesstimate. And then we're done. So if you're playing this, estimate about a year's worth of time. But anyway, we're in Chapter 8, and I actually titled this campaign diary Reunion for a particular reason. Here's a little fun fact of the game. Every single title of all these campaign diaries have come from track titles in Motorhead albums. And funny enough, all the track titles worked. They all explained what was going on in the campaign or in that session that evening, right? They were perfect. But this is the one campaign diary where I have actually titled it myself. And I've pretty much called it Reunion, because this was a pivotal, I think, almost in the entirety of the campaign, a pivotal session. And this is the reuniting of Cricket and Althea, and this journey all the characters have been through since Chapter 2, when Cricket was taken hostage or prisoner at the time. And of course, there's other things going on too. We got the cultists, we got all this kind of stuff going on. But one of the main drives was, can we rescue Cricket? And they finally did. And they did that in the last campaign diary. I mean, if you've watched that, they did finally rescue her. But the last thing they saw was a big flash of light. That's how the session had ended. Big flash of light. And that was it. And they didn't know, they thought they had died. One of my players thought, that was it, like an explosion had gone off. No, the portal had activated because it had gotten out of control right when Rezimir dropped. Cricket lost control of her powers and the portal, and it shot everybody in, halfway across the map, past, I think, at the Gray Peak Mountains. So we'll put a map up there, maybe, Gray Peak Mountains, all the way to a little tiny ice-cold village of Parnast, way out on the east side of the Forgotten Realms, just far, far, far away, which was kind of a shock to them when they saw it on the map. But anyway, so it was called Reunion, and it was a pretty emotional evening. Not a single spell was cast, besides healing themselves. Nothing, no combat of any kind. It was a very intense, I think, emotional evening. And let me tell you something. As a DM, I was scared. To be honest with you, I had been not fretting the evening, but I knew, to give you some background information, what I was thinking, I knew this had to be impactful. I knew this had to be important. I knew this had to be handled with white gloves. It just had to be special. And I spent hours looking for just the right music. And, if you've been on my channel this long, I use a lot of radio dramas and tone pieces and box text to help with verisimilitude, but it doesn't mean I have stopped how I originally used to do them, which is at the table, the cutscenes, at the table with music, and trying to describe something exactly timed with the music. And that's what I did last Friday. And I was scared about this. I was worried about this. I knew the reunion between Althea and Cricket could not be Althea just waking up and here's this little tiny fairy. And how do you hug this and embrace this fairy? And after all they've been through, right? I mean, like, what do you do with this?
All right. Cuddly. Oh, right.
It's almost like Peter Jackson talking about Lord of the Rings when he says, people, I think at some point, this is years ago, right, were upset that, they didn't kind of film the scene with Gimli getting the lock of hair from Galadriel. I think, I'm sure I'll be corrected, but I think that's right. And, Peter Jackson commenting like, that's ridiculous. How are we going to film that little thing? You couldn't even see it on film if they tried to do it. It's just a minor thing. And that's something I was kind of thinking about. Like, how do I encapsulate this reunion with a fae that's like, that big? And Althea's probably, what, 5'6", 5'7", something 5'2", I don't know how, I forgot. Actually, she said something Friday night. I don't remember exactly how big she was. But how do I do that? How do I handle it? So the answer to that was changing her form. Now, let me back up a little bit. They all transported it from the portal, right? So the portal goes off and they were scattered all over the mountainside. All right. We started with the radio drama and then went right into the session. So they were all kind of separated. And this is an echo. This is a calling back to where we began. I feel like I'm doing a lot of hand motions here. Calling back to the very first session we had where everybody was separated. We started that session with everybody just kind of all over the place and then coming together. And this was a kind of a repeating and echoing of that session where everybody was separated. And one by one, we were all coming back together in kind of this reuniting moment. I know there's a music reference there, but a reuniting moment. And it was just important. I liked the idea of the echoing of those things. I didn't expect my players to pick up on that. I mean, that was last year sometime. The storyteller, the guy who comes up with it, obviously can see that. I don't really expect my players to, but I just felt like it was a nice touch. It was a nice callback to where they began at the very beginning, and here we are at the very end, and we're all kind of coming back together. But things are different. They know each other. They know their combat. They know their attitudes. They know their personalities. And, there's more camaraderie between all the players and the characters. So that was kind of important to me. And you'll hear it if you ever go listen to the podcast. We start the game right after the radio drama, and there's a good 20, 25 seconds of silence. Like me trying to figure out how to start this because I had been fretting about it, nervous about how to do this since, for weeks, and how to bring this moment together. And so even though I had written out like exactly who I wanted to start with, even then I had this moment of freezing because I didn't want to screw it up, So I ended up starting with Pax and Thimbraeus, and them waking up and finding out they're like they were up in trees. They had teleported into the tops of pines, and they had to kind of work their way down from that and get their bearings and figure out where they were. And everybody else they couldn't see. Nobody else was around. So they had to, figure. They saw Parnast off in the distance, and they started kind of make their way down the hill. Funny enough, one of the pillars from the portal also had teleported with them and was sitting out there in the middle of the mountainside. So it was very unusual. And it took the characters. They did some investigation, but they're like, oh, wait a minute, this had come from the portal. It teleported with us. So I started with them, and we had a nice little, I think, adventurous moment together. And then I bounced to Storm. And here's another thing, Frulam. I talk about reuniting. Well, Frulam left. I wrote a letter. Maybe I don't know if I should put it up. It doesn't really make that much of a difference. But Frulam had woken up with Storm, and she saw really her opportunity to leave. She was done. But she had been getting the attention of assassins and thieves and everything else who were trying to kill her, causing problems for the party. So it was time for her to go. And so she saw a perfect opportunity to leave. So as Storm woke up, he had this letter in his pouch. She had taken some money because she didn't have any. She was stripped of all that. So she took some money, enough to get a horse down in Parnas. She talks to Storm, telling him, hey, I've been around. She cleared the snow away from Storm to keep him safe, hid him, and talked about how she saw a village, but also she felt like she wasn't alone on the mountainside, so be aware. So she's gone. I no longer have Frulam in the game. And I have plans for her. She'll show up, I think, later on. So Storm wakes up, realizes this, and starts his journey in finding everybody else. And they kind of spot each other, but they're not too sure. They're all kind of silhouetted by the fog of the snow. And they eventually start meeting up. So I started with Pax and Thimbraeus, jumped to Storm, and then I have two characters left, and that's Althea and Mortimer, and I kind of stuck them together. And so I started the part that really made me nervous, the part that I was anticipating and didn't want to screw up. And that was the reuniting of Althea and Cricket. And so I played, I don't think the players were expecting this, but but I started playing some music. It was very subtle music. It came from an ambient piece. I'll put it up here. I don't know the title. It's kind of obscure in a way. I don't know who the artist is. I bought their album because I enjoyed it. And I felt, after listening to probably about 30 to 40 tracks of trying to find just the right music, I felt like this was it. This is what spoke to my imagination. This is what spoke to what I needed and how I saw Cricket. Now let's put an image up here. This is Cricket, who is now known as Baylit. That's her real name. If you go back to the very first campaign diary, or maybe the second one, I talk about how she lost her memory. She didn't know who she was. Well, because of the torture and the things that happened, she realizes and remembers who she is. And she's no longer this little tiny fae. She has now become an Eladrin. These are things, I think, in Mortimer's Tomb of Foes, or it's Volo's Guide, one of the two, they talk about this. Now, I think it's really reserved for elves, but they have a fae ancestry. But I felt like, in my campaign, homebrew in a lot of ways, she needed to change. Now, I'm going to put another image up here. She actually could turn into a human. So right now she stands at 6'2". She's an Eladrin. And her life is completely changed. She had the ability to change into a human once a year for a day for 24 hours. And that's something I planned all the way back in June of last year, but we never used it. There was no need for it. There was no call for it. It was going to be out of a desperation that she would do it, and it just never happened. But this is a completely different look for her. You can see the old version and the new version of how she looks. Going back to where we left off, Althea wakes up in the snow, and one of her first thoughts is, where's Cricket? I need to find Cricket. All right, so she's running and she immediately leaps up, looks around, calling out her name. And then I told her, you spot her. You see her, a woman standing there about 6'2", completely nude. She's completely naked. And she has snow in her hands, and she's looking at him, and around her are some deer. It's just this kind of freeze frame moment between the two. And Baylit, or Cricket, now has her back to Althea, as Althea kind of stares out, and she slowly turns to face Althea, and it takes him only a couple seconds, but she can see Cricket's eyes in this full-grown woman, and she puts two and two together very, very quickly and realizes who it is. And the music was, I think, perfect. It was gentle. It was swelling when it needed to swell, and Cricket turns to face Althea as this new formed creature and walks over to her and drops to her knees, and she is just filled with sorrow and regret, and she feels like such a failure, but yet at the same time blessed, and thanks her to the deepest recesses of her heart for what Althea has done, for the journey they took to rescue her, to help her throughout this whole time, because she thought she was dead. They would not come for her. She had moments where she thought they were on their way, but other times, honestly, Rezimir had defeated her. Rezimir had almost cracked her, almost completely destroyed her. And so the music was perfect, and it showed a lot of the gentleness between the two and the bonding of the two. And in all honesty, I almost cried because my player was crying, just welled up suddenly, and it surprised me in some ways. I knew it would be emotional, like I knew it had to be, and I thought it would be, but I didn't expect that amount of tears, and not a bad thing by any freaking means whatsoever. I love it when we can be connected to NPCs. That's a hard thing to do if you're not careful. In one aspect, we have Cricket, who was very emotional, people very attached, and then we have Frulam, who I was hoping to have a little bit more connectivity, but because of some blundering and dice rolls, she kind of comes off as a little wishy-washy, and I hate that. I hate that for Frulam. But when it came to Cricket, it hit all the right beats, all the right notes. And if I may say, as a DM, one of my most favorite NPCs ever. I had no clue at the starting this is how important she would be. This is how much the story would revolve around her, because it sounds kind of ridiculous that the story itself is surrounding itself over the DM's NPC, right? That's just not, seems weird, right? And I never meant it to be that way, but the bonding between Althea and Cricket, or Baylit, it was too strong. It was very, very strong. And I underestimated in some ways, even though I thought it was strong, I underestimated just how strong it was. And I did certain subtle things with the character. I feel like she needed to change now. For one thing, Althea is no longer controlling Cricket. I am. Some of the things I've learned from Frulam, how I want things to be a little bit different for my NPCs. But two, she's an Eladrin. She has changed. And I didn't want, Althea trying to figure out her new powers and stuff. Third, I wanted to do it because I wanted to use the powers and make sure she doesn't come off as a buffoon. She's changed. And also, her movements. Now, Cricket, or Baylit, I'm going to go back and forth with these names, is gentle. She's sensuous. I think that's how you say that. Sensuous in a way, and very loving. And I've never played an NPC like this before, so I would do the subtle things and how she would grab a character. Because here's the thing, we call it reunion, right? It wasn't just Althea. She has a reunion with Mortimer and Thymbraeus and Pax and Storm. And I think they were actually really, I'm not trying to brag here. I just think the story between the players and the DM worked really well. Everybody was firing on full cylinders. Everything just kind of connected really well because Cricket was just in tears through almost the first hour of the game as she embraced all the players, all the characters who came to her aid and sacrificed themselves. Obviously, there's some brief discussion of like, okay, what happened to you? Now you're like 6'2", and there was a whole discussion about that. And she become, like I said, the Eladrin. There was such gentleness in the reunion of every single player, of hugging, embracing, crying, and just the way Cricket would hug and hold and like put their heads together. She just kind of just needed to touch each one of the players, and how she would hug and embrace and kind of take her hand and go down the arm, as she kind of separated, just little things like that. She's far more affectionate. She's changed completely as a fairy and as a woman. Very different. It's a very challenging NPC to play, but I love her. This is a weird campaign diary. I'm sorry. This is just a weird one. I mean, I know we like our NPCs, but I find that I'm even connected to her in a weird way, even though she's fictional. Even though this is not a real character. So she's going to have a prominent role, I think, now as the story unfolds. And she found out that her sister, her battle sister, Anodyne, had helped in the pursuit and had bonded with Althea to become her Morir. So she was getting all this information. Matter of fact, there's still a lot of things that haven't been talked about. But fairies' names are very important, and you don't just give them out. But she actually told all the players what her true name was because she felt like they earned it. They sacrificed themselves for her. So she let them know her real name, which is Baylit. They still call her Cricket to keep a code name. But they were all now connected to her. So they, we have like an hour and a half of this, and people coming back together, reuniting. And, she's naked, so they have to kind of work that out. She doesn't realize it. She's not that kind of person. She doesn't have any shame as humans, as we do. No shame in this. She just doesn't even realize it. So they have to kind of take care of her, and they all eventually go down to Parnas. Parnas is very cold in its reception, but also in its temperature. And they eventually come down into Parnas. They meet this wheelwright who walks in. He's riding in a wagon with a bunch of wheels in the back, and they kind of get some information for him. But they eventually go in and start to settle down, and there's an unease to the place, and they see a couple things here and there, and they can see how controlling the guards are in this particular area. And of course, through perception checks and insights, they realize, okay, obviously there's a huge castle here. This castle, why is a castle in a little tiny village like this? It doesn't make any sense what's going on here. So they're doing their exploration in Parnas, and they eventually go to one of the inns, and they haven't been to civilization in a very long time. So they feed themselves and they kind of procure a room, get their rest, because they just came from the castle and they're all beat up. They used all their health potions after they teleported. They have very little spells left. They're just really in bad shape. They need to get their 8 hours in. So they go to the inn. And all kinds of little tiny subtle things happen in there. But there is some suspicion. They don't feel very comfortable in Parnas. Matter of fact, I'm going to put a little thing here. You'll probably see it in a map here soon, a map video. But here's the Parnas built-in tabletop simulator. It was a little fun to do. I wasn't going to do it, but here it is. And they kind of wandered around the town. I put the tokens in and whatnot, and they can kind of go to different houses. And so it's a little more, it brought the 2D map to life. But anyway, guys, we ended with them, not camping, but inside the inn and resting, and Cricket standing by the window, and everybody just kind of rejuvenating themselves after all that's happened. It was emotionally draining. and physically draining on all of them. But that's it. That's where we ended. You can see no swords, no axes, no shields shattering, no nothing. It was just a reunion. And it worked out really well. I think it worked out really, really great. And it was one I was very nervous about. I was scared about. I really wanted to make sure it was perfect, from the music to how I described things. And it had to be touching. I think it's a session, and we all have these, right? A session that I won't forget. Probably ever. I have never had such strong bonding with an NPC in my entire life. And I've had some pretty significant NPCs with various players in my life that I have played with, but this one was so cemented. It was so strong. I can't imagine what would happen if Bayleet dies. I don't know what that's going to do. Anyway, Bayleet, or Cricket, I can tell you this much, is hell-bent on destroying the cult. If anything has come from this, she is being reborn as an Eladrin, but also reborn with great vengeance and fury and a vexation that is deep inside of her, that is just waiting to be unleashed. So that's a lot of things to come. We're getting ready to play this Friday, and I think there's a possibility that all hell is going to break loose. And there's a lot of little things. I wish I could talk about it. A lot of little things, though, that have come from Bayleet's torture that no one's really quite aware yet of this stuff behind the scenes. You don't torture Fae and not have some repercussions, not the Fae, but spiritual, astral repercussions in the real world. And that's all I'll say about that. But anyway, guys, that's it. That's the campaign diary. Sorry if it was a little slow. Sorry if it was a little bit boring. I'm looking at 24 minutes. I'm trying not to cut these down, but it was just so emotional. I really feel like I don't even feel like I even did it justice here in the campaign diary. But I know, as you as a DM and maybe the player, you've had these moments, and they're powerful and they're hard to forget. God, I wish I would have filmed it that night. I really wish. It's on audio. Well, you could definitely hear it there. All right, guys, that's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for keeping up with us. We're nearing the end, so don't worry. These videos will end soon. But thank you for watching us, keeping up with us. And Miles, man, gosh, such an emotional night. I'll see you in the next video.
Are you crying?